I want to have a quick look at some stamp duty land tax aspects because we've increasingly had more queries come our way as this is another area that's become increasingly complicated by changes in rules. But there are some opportunities within this. One of those is multiple dwellings relief. So if part of one transaction you're actually acquiring more than one dwelling, it is actually possible to look to average a purchase consideration across the dwellings, which is advantageous when you consider the banding effect of SDLT. So you might have, subject to additional rates, a 0% ban for 250,000 and then we hit a 5% ban for residential property. And the upper rates go quite high, push up to 10, 12%. So an advantage is, particularly if you've got a particularly valuable property, pushing towards £1 million, the situation may be where you've got an annex as well. So it could be a granny annex. So it's entirely possible that you might be acquiring two properties. If that's the case, you can then take advantage of more of the smaller rates of tax that apply. For this to apply, both properties have to be self-contained, suitable for living independently. So that would mean it needs to have appropriate bathroom facilities, kitchen facilities, bedroom, etc., and separate access. But seeing quite a few people, and sometimes if you're looking at another property looking to move, it can be a valuable aspect to consider because it could significantly reduce the SDLT that's payable. Also, on a similar vein, mixed-use properties. So the concept here, that there are two categories for SDLT. It's residential and non-residential. The rates for non-residential are a lot lower. And in some instances, purchasers will acquire property which comprises a residential element and a non-residential element. A typical example of that would be where you've got a block, perhaps with a shop at the bottom and flats above. So if it's a mixed-use purchase, then the non-residential rates apply. So again, that's a lot more beneficial. It's an area where we've seen a lot of schemes, arrangements, trying to take advantage of this, and there have been some interesting tax cases. So examples of that would be, again, out in the countryside, you've got a property, a garden, and there's some woodland perhaps next to the garden. The woodland itself is regarded as non-residential. So logically, you might think, well, is that mixed use? And that subject to a large case, it was determined, despite being non-residential, the woodland didn't qualify the property for mixed use because actually it required to be used for commercial purposes. But what did qualify is you've got land that's able to be used for grazing, for example. So you're able to operate some form of basic business. So it is worth looking out again for opportunities. If you've got something a bit larger, an element of diversity, then again there can be SDLT advantages. One of the ways where landlords were targeted was this additional property surcharge. So that was the extra 3% that was added to SDLT rates. So that applies when a property is acquired and at the end of that day of acquisition, the purchaser has more than one residential property unless they're moving home. So if they're disposing of a previous home at the same time, moving home, then the surcharge wouldn't apply. But it creates a problem if you have people who are moving home but are in a position where they're unable or don't have to sell their previous home, because when that happens, that additional 3% surcharge applies. But you do have a 3-year window in which time to sell the previous home, and should you be able to do that, you can then apply to get the 3% back. One point to watch with that, though, is that surcharge kicks in should any joint owner have an additional property, and that property can be anywhere in the world, so it's not limited to the UK. And we see this having more of an issue when potentially the bank of mum and dad help children get on the property ladder, particularly if there's a requirement for mortgage purposes for a name to be registered on the deeds. So 1 or 2 instances to just watch out how that gets structured so you don't end up having to pay more additional property charge. We'll be talking a bit more about companies later on, but one aspect with SDLT, even if a company is acquiring its first residential property, point to be aware that a surcharge would apply in that circumstance.